Okay. Hello, and welcome back to the Relationship Rescue Summit. I am here today with my friend and my favorite financial dude, Kurt Mueller. And the reason I wanted Kurt with us is because he is not your average, what I call average financial dude. He has been a certified financial planner since 2012. And he does have a proven track record of helping his clients reach their financial security goals. But he's different. And this is why I wanted to have him here today, because there are so many, which I've said, there are so many external things that affect our relationships. And we all know that money can be a real issue between your partner and you. But also, that can also carry over, that anxiety can carry over into all relationships. So Kurt is different in a way that he empowers his clients and helps them take an actual active role in shaping their future. And that's what makes him different. I have had the pleasure of working with Kurt, and I wouldn't have traded it, and I won't trade it. I mean, he's just been a huge blessing in my life. So I'm a little partial to him. And he's also a volunteer fireman. He's a barbecue pitmaster, and he's a podcast host. So Kurt, can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm so thrilled to have you. And can you tell us a little bit about your journey, your passion, and how this all ties in together and how you serve? Start over. We lost you there for a second.
So great question. Thanks again for having me on the show. This is I love this whole concept, this whole idea of this summit is really, really cool. So, my journey goes back a long, long time. I'm 40 years old, just turned 40 a few weeks ago. And my journey probably goes back to, before I was 8 or 9. And, I learned some things along the way throughout my childhood from my parents that, maybe weren't the best strategies. Maybe they weren't, the most sound financial strategies. And I think over time, as I began to realize that, it really cemented, my passion for helping others in the areas of financial planning, financial security. And so that started at a very early age for me. I kind of floundered around after college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Like a lot of folks, did the corporate 500 thing like so many of us did, and realized that just wasn't for me anymore, and I wanted to do more of my life. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I found out I didn't make a very good employee pretty quickly. And so I'd always been interested in financial planning, and so as you alluded to, I started in this career back in January 2012 is when I started. And so again, I think for me that journey starts, like I said, decades ago. And I think it all boils down to people. You talked about just how we set ourselves apart, how we're different. I think we just have to understand that, and we have to accept that 98% of life is not controllable. In fact, I might even say 99% is just outside of our control. That's really tough to accept for a lot of people. It's no different than money, right? It's no different. It's the same deal. And I think we forget about that, and we tend to be very hard on ourselves. And we have to understand two things. One, we have to understand that 99% of the time we're going to struggle with money. But secondly, I think we need to understand that, hey, you know what, as a species, our brains just aren't wired all that great for money, for financial planning. We're just not. It doesn't compute very well.
Yeah.
So I think we have to accept that. I mean, that's half the battle is just accepting that, hey, you know what, this is going to be something that my brain tells me I shouldn't do. My brain's going to scream at me, I don't want to do this. I don't want to look at numbers. I don't want to do a monthly budget, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because the brain is lazy. I'm not saying everybody's lazy. I'm saying our brains are lazy, and it's going to take the path of least resistance. And so a lot of times when we get faced with numbers and charts and spreadsheets and all this stuff and the stock market and headlines, it can be really overwhelming. Yeah. And we just kind of get the deer in the headlights look, where we just,
as I've said, yes,
we don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but because you do work differently, and I can testify to that, because all of that you just said has always been, it's just not my strength. It goes over my head. You can talk to me about the market and all of that until you're blue in the face, but It's not speaking my language or my understanding. And the difference is because nothing against my parents, generational stuff is just, we don't know. And everybody's just trying to do the best they can. And I did not have that good teaching of how to handle money or what is the process at all of handling money. And you've taught me and have been teaching me a better path, but it's so important to be active in that because it all comes back to me and changing my thinking, my mental process. So when you're working with your clients, and can you tell us about do it differently and why, and what, and ultimately guide that towards how it does affect our relationships?
So I love what you said there, in terms of, talking about money, handling money, and, I think empowering is the right word, right? That's probably the best word that I can think of, because again, going back to what we just talked about, and that is this resistance that we naturally have to dealing with anything financial or money related. Like we've got a resistance that's like almost built into our brains, and a lot of people don't understand that. And so I think going back to what I just said, if we understand that from the get-go, then we know, okay, I'm going to really need to focus. I'm going to really need to dig in deep here. And if you know that going into it, then I think it makes it a little bit easier. Of course, Mike Tyson famously said, hey, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? And it's true. A financial plan is great. Having a roadmap is fantastic, but I'm more interested in what you do and how you react to those speed bumps, to those, unforeseen events. That's what I'm most interested in. You mentioned the word educate. Educate is a very powerful word, in my opinion. It's something that I take a lot of pride in. It's something that candidly, I don't think the industry wants the general public to know certain things. And I'm very outspoken about that. I think education is really, really big because you are naturally going to empower others if you take the time to educate them. It's just that simple. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be financial planning, could be how to change, the oil in my truck, which I have no earthly idea how to do.
Neither do I.
And I'm okay with that.
Me too.
I think, but going back to your question about, how do we set ourselves apart? I think it's simple, but it's not easy. And I say that because it comes down to people. It comes down to, hey, I've got to take the time to listen, to articulate back, to the client, hey, I want to make sure I heard everything that you said. Here's what you said. This is what I heard. Is that correct? Because just because you said it, I may hear something completely different. And I think that's where that communication piece comes into play. And so I like to think that we take extra time, right? We may even take extra time when we're working with folks to make sure that they are crystal clear on what we're doing and the big one, why we are doing it, right? We never want to have anybody that says, hey, I'm doing A, B, and C because Kurt said it was a good idea. I appreciate that, and I'm not expecting somebody to be an expert by any means, but I'd like to think that because we're taking that time to educate and build that relationship, that clients can, broadly speaking, articulate, okay, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it. And I feel confident in that because I'm empowered, and I'm empowered because I'm educated. So that's, I think it all goes back to that education piece. If we take the time to educate, and I think that goes across every single industry, your industry, my industry, any industry. You take the time to educate, you're going to empower others. They're going to feel more confident. And you know what? When people are confident, they're decisive. They make good decisions generally.
And the way you worded that is, because you do paraphrase, you do make sure that you understand where someone is coming from and what is the why, what is really the deeper problem, what's the always is. There's the surface stuff, and then there's the underlying challenges, the ones that wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning and weigh on our minds. So you do have a way of digging. And when you're saying that about clarifying and making sure you understand this is what I'm hearing. That's a good practice too, because that's a practice that's learned in the process that you can to the relationships as well. So if you can talk to us a little bit about how you actually sit down with someone, and I think we have a storm coming in, so I hope we're going to get through this because I'm seeing a little bit of internet message here. So let's keep our fingers crossed. If you could give a little bit more detail, it's like the sky's getting black. If you could give us a little bit more detail on sitting down with someone and how you actually get them to feel comfortable and to be brave in taking on an active role.
So I think first and foremost, it starts by acknowledging the 800-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak, right? And that is one of the hardest things for people to do is to call up a financial planner and make an appointment. That in and of itself is a big, big step. And so I always take some time to point that out to that individual or that couple that's sitting across from me to say, hey, you know what? Pat yourself on the back. This is really hard to do. And you did it. So half the battle, you've already fought half the battle, so to speak. And I think what that does is that reinforces to them, because they probably didn't realize how difficult it was, or maybe they did. It's just they never really thought about it. But that reinforces to them that, hey, this is a big step. Secondly, it goes back to listening. My job is to ask really good questions and to listen. And I think, if I take the time to empower people to share things with me that in some cases they may not have ever shared with anyone, then I think that is how we go about really peeling back the layers of the onion and getting to the meat or the heart of the matter when it comes to finances, when it comes to financial planning. If you think about it, most normal people, right, are smart. They know a couple of things. They know that they probably could lose a few pounds. They probably could work out maybe an extra day or two a week, and they probably ought to save a little bit more money. I think everybody kind of falls into that category, right?
That's fair.
They know that. They don't need, people don't need me to tell them, hey, according to projections, you're going to be short when it comes to retirement. They know that. The reason that they don't want me to tell them that is now that they have proof. So it goes back to that whole psychology of, hey, well, if I just avoid it, I don't have proof, so
it'll fix itself. It doesn't.
It'll fix itself. And so I think, how your question was, how do I get them, how do we get them to start talking? How do we get them to open up? Number one, you got to empower them. You got to empower them and say, hey, this is a big deal. Thank you for being here. This is hard to do. And then I've got to ask questions. Why are you here? What are your expectations? You know me now. I'm very upfront, just, very upfront. What are your expectations? What are your goals? So I think it's just asking those questions. And as time goes on, and I usually take an hour and a half to 2 hours on these first meetings, right? Because I don't want to rush. But I think as time goes on, they begin to get more comfortable. They're also, here's the reality of it. Here's the harsh reality of it. My industry is guilty pretty much on a daily basis of using big words that nobody understands in the hopes that they seem smarter than they really are.
That's been my experience.
And it's especially rampant.
Not with you.
Right. And it's especially rampant with, the older generation, advisors that are 20 years older than I am. It's especially rampant with them. And in your case, like you mentioned, unfortunately, women, there's not a large percentage of women that are advisors in the industry, right? So it's in my opinion, it's a very underserved area of the population. And let's face it, when it comes to money, just like life, men and women think very differently.
And how does that affect relationships?
Good question. So I think, the number one thing you have to understand is how, you've got to have that conversation with your spouse and understand, okay, what drives them in terms of money? Like what is their money motivation? Why do they want money? Most people will say, I want to make a lot of money. Okay. Why? Well, because I want to be comfortable, right? I get that, but why? And you keep going and, well, I want to be comfortable because, I like to buy nice things. Okay. Well, why? And then people get mad. They're like, well, I don't know. But I think the important thing there is to understanding the why, right? Between both, the spouses need to understand how each other deals with money and how they communicate about money, because just because, you say one thing doesn't mean that's what your significant other hears. And so to answer your question, it has the ability to negatively or positively impact relationships.
And especially if you start, if you're being educated and you're working together and becomes a team effort, it can make a huge difference. But it really does come back to what's going on in each individual's psyche and what their past history has been with money, and facing those things really opens the door to creating a whole new plan. One that you're actually comes from you. When you say why, it's that burning why inside. What's the inner feelings, the desires?
Yes. I think the best thing a couple can do, married, dating, whatever, is have the money conversation. I get it. It's not fun. Most people would rather run a marathon than do it. I understand that. I am telling you, it is so much easier to just, what I like to say, kind of bite the bullet, run into the storm, kind of like the bison do, the bison on the plains. They would run towards the storm. The cows run away from the storm. And the interesting thing is that the bison got through the storm quicker than the cows did, because the cows could not run the storm. Right. So that's kind of where I would say, some of these things, when you talk about financial planning, you need to be like the bison. You need to just run towards the storm and just get it done with, because if you run away from it, it's just going to make it worse.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one thing that you do, and let not this be fearful to anyone, but you give homework.
Yes. I do give homework. I think it's important. With any professional, in your line of work, any sort of professional you're working with, when it's a service-based business, which is, this is what this is. I think it's important that that person that you're working with has at least some sort of a action plan after each discussion. Otherwise, you have a lot of great discussions and there's no movement. And one thing that, and you know this about me, discussions are great, but if I don't see any movement, any forward progress, I tend to get pretty antsy, and I'm not asking people to throw a Hail Mary on the first play, to use a football analogy. I'm just talking about forward progress, even if it's a couple of feet. That's all we're looking for.
And it's a start.
It's a start.
It's a start, and it's a practice. We didn't grasp, or we didn't develop these ways of thinking, these head overnight. It's like, you didn't put on weight overnight. You're not going to take it off overnight. You're not going to change the thinking and the feet. But having the homework, having the practice and taking those changes slowly and being a part, it does eventually get better. And this might sound weird when you're talking about planning, but I've learned that it actually can be fun. I know it's a weird thing to say, but
believe it or not, yes. And it's a process. It's never really done.
That's true.
It's a process. You're constantly fine tuning it. Now you can be done from the standpoint of, we've got the framework now and we can tweak as needed. But my point there is that you got to continually monitor it, make sure that you're, staying on the right track. And I think where people do get into trouble is they get motivated, they get really excited, they get an awesome plan, they connect with a local advisor in their area, and life happens. And that plan just sits on the shelf and gathers dust until they're forced to pull it off the shelf. And unfortunately, if they're forced to, then a lot of times your options are limited, when you have to react versus being proactive.
Can you touch on, because let's face it, every relationship, it always comes back to, or it starts with the relationship we have with ourselves. And if you have a poor relationship with money, that can't help but feel internally personal. Like I'm not smart, not good enough, or I'm not educated. Well, I don't know, whatever the things that we say to ourselves, or I'll never understand money. I don't understand math, whatever themselves. So how does someone who is kind of down on themselves and you're just not sure, how might they be brave? And what questions might they ask if they make that call to a financial person to help them feel more comfortable?
Sure. So first question I would ask, and this is absolutely a reasonable question, is how are you compensated?
Ah, good one.
Very important question. You need to understand how the advisor is compensated. Are they compensated as a fee only structure? Are they compensated for their time only? Are they compensated for assets under management? Do they have an insurance license? Because they can get commissions off of that. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's just, I think it's important that the client understand how that advisor is compensated. And the second question I would ask is, are you a fiduciary? Very simple question. It's a yes or no answer. And fiduciary is a legal, a very strong legal definition that essentially says in so many words that the advisor is bound legally, morally, and ethically to always act in the best interest of the client, which, you might sit there and go, well, duh. Unfortunately, there's a reason that we have a lot of regulation, a lot of compliance in the financial planning industry. And a lot of this may seem common sense stuff, but there's a reason that we have all the compliance and regulation in the industry. And so I think but again, asking those two big questions, right? So just to recap, number one is, how are you compensated? Number two is, are you a fiduciary? And I would say the last one would be, am I going to work with you or a junior advisor?
Excellent point. Excellent point.
Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, you need to understand that, because if you expect to work with the advisor and that's not how they run their practice, then you might be surprised when you go to a meeting and you're sitting down with a junior advisor, which I understand has a negative connotation to it. Just because someone's a junior advisor doesn't mean they're less qualified. Usually means they're younger, right? And for some people, they have that stigma of, oh my God, well, what is this 22-year-old, So I don't mean to beat up on junior advisors, but I guess my point there is that, understanding the process, understanding how they run their practice is really, really important.
It is.
Here's the last one I just thought of. This is really important. How quickly do you respond to fill in the blank, right? Email, text, voicemail. Very important question, right? Because you need to understand, this is where, they may say something and you hear something different, right? They may say 2 business days. To them, that's 2 business days. To you, that's 2 calendar days. Those kinds of things, but getting that, like, understanding, okay, if I send you an email on Monday, can I expect a reply by Tuesday? Like, what's the reasonable, all this is reasonable stuff to ask. I think people don't ask it because they're scared to ask it because they think they can't.
Well, and they think they don't want conflict, or they want everybody to like them. That's a whole other discussion.
Right. That is, we could go on for an hour on that.
Yeah, I know. I will say that, and it might sound strange, but social media is what it is, but it did me well. It gave me the path to finding you. And I actually stalked you for quite some time on social media. And we laughed about that, but it gave me an opportunity to see you as a human being, as a real person, as someone who has a family, who's down to earth, who has such a love of community. So there was I got a real significant feeling of your compassion and your passion, and it made a big difference. And I think who you work with, whether it be a financial person, whether it be a coach, whether it be a marriage counselor, whether it be a therapist, whoever it is, it's important to have that relationship. It's important to feel safe.
Right.
And that's the word. It's important to feel safe with the person that you're working with.
That right there, that sums it up, really. I mean, that could be the whole show right there. Feel safe. If you don't feel safe, don't work with them. Especially when it comes to, I think actually you could probably apply that to pretty much any business out there, right? But most definitely in the financial planning business, because yes, there are a lot of complex strategies. There's a lot of big words. There's a lot of, processes and systems that, the average layperson doesn't understand. And yes, in the hands of someone who has very misguided intentions, who is, just a bad person, they can absolutely exploit that. Yeah. And they do, unfortunately, it happens quite frequently, hence the reason why we have, the compliance and the regulation that we do have. But I think going back to this idea of, what's the word? I mean, really education is, and I know we've hammered that into the ground, but that really is just the best way, in my opinion, to go about it. And if you're meeting with somebody and they're not willing to take the time to educate you, boy, that's a red flag.
That's a sign. Yeah.
That's just a red flag. Yeah. Yeah.
Where would you recommend for someone, and especially women, where there's so much, not that there isn't a lot on a man's plate, but where our minds tend to be is on everything that we have to do. And sometimes I think that is a way of also ignoring the financial point. Well, I'll get to it later. When I get to this point, then I'll reach out. Those are blocks. But if someone wanted to, if you for someone something right now that, okay, I know you might not be ready right this minute, but here's something you can do to help yourself begin to take some steps to see where you are and where you would like to be. Dream about where you'd like to be, and then maybe go from there.
Yeah, so my answer is going to surprise you because it's not a financial book at all. It's a book written by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. One of the best books I've ever read. And the reason that I recommend that book is very simple, and that is because if you can really fully understand your why and your passion, then I think the rest of it is relatively easy, because everything outside of that is going to be focused on achieving that why, whatever that is, right? So if we know the why, if we know the passion, then everything financially related, from assets, liabilities, you name it, all of that is, in terms of our decision-making, we're going to run it through the filter. Does it help us does it get us closer to our why? Yes or no? Okay, it does. Perfect. Let's do it. Not really sure. Okay, probably don't need to do it. Well, no, it's not going to get us closer to our why. All right, don't need to do it. So I think reading that book, figuring out your why, gives you a big filter to filter everything through. Because if it comes out the other end and it's like, this is not going to get us closer to our why, then it doesn't make sense to do it financially. And I think that's what people need to understand too, is, ultimately my job is it's simple, but it's not easy. My job is to make sure that everything the clients are dreaming about, right? Everything that they're passionate about, everything that they want to accomplish in their life. My goal is to make sure that everything they're doing financially, assets, liabilities, savings, you name it, my goal is to make sure that everything they're doing in that world is in alignment and getting them closer to that goal. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
If I can't do that and they can do it on their own, then I'm not valuable, and they don't need me. Right. And so I think that's really where, plans are great. Discussions are great. But if I can't educate and help motivate and empower people, then I could create the best financial plans the world's ever seen, but none of them are going to get executed. They're just going to sit there and gather dust. And so I think that's the real issue here, is that there's, a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. And I think for someone just starting out, especially women, I think if you read that book, Start With Why, I've read it twice. It's a really, really, really good book. Mm-hmm. Now, once you figure that out, then it's really diving into, okay, setting up interviews, right, with various financial advisors, financial planner in your area, and interview them, ask them tough questions. I mean, these questions I'm mentioning are completely reasonable questions to ask.
They are.
I also think that outside of start with why, I think that we live in this age of information. Some may say that it's too much information. I kind of see that. But there is an absolute plethora of really good, basic financial planning guidelines on YouTube, things like that. Now, I wouldn't recommend if you've got, a complex situation. I don't know if YouTube would be the best fit for that.
Maybe not.
But if you're just starting out and you just want to say, hey, look, if you want to tackle one thing, and that's the one thing I'm big on, tackle one thing, just do one thing, right? And then tomorrow do another thing. And then before you know it, you got them all done. But if you wanted to tackle one thing today and you're watching this interview, go write down your monthly budget. Put it on a spreadsheet, put it on a pad of paper. I bet you most of your viewers don't have a budget written down.
The B word. The B word. Yes.
The B word.
Yes.
That's the, you know what? That is 100% in your control. 100%.
Yeah.
Like that's the 1% of life we can control. My take is, well, look, if life's going to give you 1% to control, by God, you better control it.
And it actually can be empowering once you get over that, oh my God, budget. It can be empowering, really.
It can be empowering. It can also be a wake-up call.
Yeah.
It can also be a wake-up call. And I think that's another reason why maybe folks avoid it. But sometimes you need that wake-up call. Sometimes you need to see it. And like you said, it empowers you. It also may empower you to have the conversation with your spouse to say, hey,
exactly.
We keep saying we need to save money and we keep saying we're going to do it, but we don't do it. And look at how much, look at the deficit every month, and because when you see it, it's more impactful as opposed to just, talking about it.
It's not about blame. It's not about having another argument. It's about just finally coming together and taking the steps to be educated, start taking bring your dreams back. Bring your dreams back and know that it's a place for you to, you can journal, there's all kinds of things you can do, but to begin that process of making it all become real. So it's not about blame. It's not about shame. It's not about thinking you're awful because you've gotten to this point, whatever that point is, but it's really about coming together, and whether you're alone, you're still going to empower yourself and you're going to enhance that relationship with yourself. You're going to be a more joyful person, which is going to go into every relationship. And if it's with a partner, what a way to build a stronger relationship by building a stronger financial future. So is there any last minute word you'd like to send us off with?
There is no better time than the present. There will always be a better time to do this stuff. There will always be an excuse to do it tomorrow or the next week or the week after. I'm telling you, there's no better time in the present. Take action today. One small step, take action today, and accept that it's going to be difficult, accept that it's going to be uncomfortable, and accept that you're not going to like it. Accept it on the front end. That way, it's not a surprise when you get into it.
And trust me, it can be fun.
It can be fun.
Yes.
I want your viewers, I want them to be in the right mindset. Like, okay, I'm just going to accept that my brain is going to reject this. And this may not be the most fun thing I do today. But I think if you accept that, that going in, you're like, okay, cool. So that's what I would say.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Kurt. I always love to hear what you have to say. And I hope that, and I'm sure that people are taking away maybe a little bit more feeling of having the courage that they can reach out and maybe begin at least exploring what their options might be. So thank you, Kurt, for being here with us. And thank you everyone for participating and joining into the Relationship Rescue Summit. Stay with us. There'll be more to come. And thank you so much. I wish everyone a fabulous day.